Welcome around the campfire, folks. I'm talking to a good friend of mine, Bob Battle of Cass City. And we're sitting right now in the Battle Sugar Bush near Cass City. It's maple syrup time. And anyway, at least the sun's shining today.
It's a much better day today than it was yesterday. It was just really
yesterday
cold.
was your open house.
Yeah, it was our open house. We have it on the third Saturday of March every year. And boy, if I couldn't have picked a worse day this year.
Oh, it was nasty.
It was really, really cold. We had, what I would call our die-hard, every single year customers did show up, and they bought their syrup. But more of the families bringing their kids. It just was not the right day for that yesterday.
You know, Michigan is Michigan.
Yeah, that's right.
In March, you can't get a more fickle month than March.
The funny thing this year is that I've been telling people that we've been getting more winter in March this year than we did in January this year.
Oh, I've had to plow snow during November deer season one time.
Yeah.
And I mean, it just came down nasty for a while.
Yeah.
And then along comes December, and it mellows out into January, and then, oh, man.
Yeah.
It's been a crazy year.
It has been.
And the wind. I am so tired of the wind. But anyway, your great grandfather settled here in 1882.
Yeah, the year after the Great Fire.
And your dad is fourth generation on the land, and you are fifth generation.
That's right.
I'm fourth generation on my family farm. My great-grandfather came to the thumb in 1883.
Yep.
Your great-great-grandfather bought a land with some trees.
80 acres he bought.
Yep. And my great-grandfather ended up with a charred black landscape because the fire of 1881 had swept through the thumb. Now, what happened to the acreage your great-great-grandfather bought? How did that miss everything?
I don't know how the fire jumped around it, but the current woodlot is about 9.5, 10 acres. And for whatever weird reason, the fire jumped around it. It charred the rest of the 80 acres, but that 9.5 acres of woods was spared. He squared it up. He farmed around it, but he left the. Back then, it would have been a mix of sugar maple and beech. And of course, over the last 140 years, we've taken out beech in favor of the sugar maple, but so it's now predominantly sugar maple. There's still a few beech. Beech would be the second most common tree in the woodlot. But yeah, it's a real nice stand of woods.
Now, do you have any of the original trees?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And what do you call those? Virgin timber?
Yeah, that's what my dad calls them, is virgin timber.
Virgin timber. Yeah. Now, we're talking some sugar maples that...
About 300 years is what we...
Oh, they got a longevity to them. So, yeah. Well, anyway, I know there's pictures that you have that of your great-great-grandfather using a great big kettle.
Yeah. My dad says that picture was taken in 1917. George and his wife's name was Annie. My great-great-grandmother's name was Annie. George and Annie had 3 sons. And one of them was I guess in the Army at the time. I don't know if he was overseas during World War I. I get the sense that he was here in the States, but he was in the Army, in the World War I era. And one of the other sons went around the farmstead. He got a brand new camera and took a series of photos to send to his brother. And one of the pictures was of their dad when he was 75 years old, here in the woods. Boiling over an open kettle maple syrup.
Yep. Well, we're having right now the global warming situation.
Sure. Yep.
And I've been noticing sap starting to run earlier than ever. And I went online. It was USDA had a special thing printed up where even in Maine and I guess Vermont is number 1 in maple syrup.
Yeah, in the United States.
In the United States. But anyway, some of those people were tapping as early as December.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
I had not seen that.
According to that report.
Yeah.
But I know friends of mine that tapped their own, for their own use, early February.
Yeah.
And he my friends got to the point. He says, "Man, I hope it stops pretty soon."
Well,
he doesn't want to waste
it. Might not. Tim Perkins, Dr. Tim Perkins from the University of Vermont, is the national expert on that, and he's documented it. But our seasons are definitely earlier than they were 30, 40, 50 years ago, and they're also shorter. Dr. Tim Perkins, and he's actually, this is his last season at the University of Vermont, but he'll be retiring, and we're losing a vast amount of academic knowledge in the maple syrup because Dr. Perkins is retiring. But boy, it's funny. I'll send him questions. I only send him about one question every year, but he responds to my questions. He's a great resource.
You gotta love it, especially when you're in this business.
Yep.
You know, I got trees that I think I can start tapping now. I planted them myself.
Oh,
They're
okay.
sugar maple.
Yeah.
And I pruned them. I tend to prune them like in February and stuff like that.
Yep.
And I have had winters that, not recently, but I've had times when I cut those limbs off, they didn't even bleed.
Oh,
and that tells you guys were having a bad year. Do you remember any bad years? That I think I can start tapping now. I planted them myself.
Oh,
They're
okay.
sugar maple.
Yeah.
And I pruned them. I tend to prune them like in February and stuff like that.
Yep.
And I have had winters that, not recently, but I've had times when I cut those limbs off, they didn't even bleed.
Oh,
and that tells you guys were having a bad year. Do you remember any bad years?
Oh, I for whatever reason, it would have been 1992. It had to have been 92. I was in college at Michigan State at the time, and I know that they produced 75 gallons that year. Is the shortest. Our typical year, we will produce anywhere from around 170 to around 200 gallons a year is a good year. Back then, it was probably closer to 150. We've made some improvements, over the last 30 years. But in 1992, we produced 75 gallons.
Man, that hurts.
Yeah. So it was a half a crop. Cause
now translate that into how much sap did that take?
Oh,
it's 40 gallons.
The ratio is 40 to 1. But people, that's an average. At the beginning of the season, it's more like 32 to 1. We get a sweeter sap at the beginning of the season.
And it's a amber color.
It's a lighter color.
You got different colors as the season goes.
Yep. It's a lighter syrup. It's a sweeter, lighter tasting. So it's lighter in color, visually. It's also lighter in taste. And then at the end of the season, the sap gets more dilute. It's more like a 50 to 1 ratio. And the syrup, the finished syrup, is darker in color and stronger in taste.
Yep, and that's kind of what you see being sold a lot of, is the darker version.
Yeah, well, if you go to the grocery store and buy, more of the commodity type stuff, that's always a blended syrup.
Oh,
they blend the syrup from the entire season. They blend the lighter and the darker together to get like a medium amber. So the more your commercial, very large outfits blend their syrup. We're a much smaller producer. We keep our batches separate, so we are able to sell the very, very light syrup from the beginning of the season and the very, very dark syrup from the end of the season. Because people have preferences, and we're able to satisfy those preferences.
My preference is real maple syrup. I don't care what stage it is or if it's blended. Table syrup what they call it maple syrup is not maple syrup.
No, that would be corn syrup based. Syrup. Yeah. Yep.
Well, maple syrup and maple sugar. When the pioneers came. This cane sugar was what was back in colonial times.
Absolutely,
and it had to be brought in from the Caribbean.
Right.
And we're not talking cheap stuff here at all.
No.
And it
was also produced by slave labor at that point.
Yes. Yeah. But in the Northeast, and thanks to the Native Americans passing that on, maple syrup and maple sugar. Actually, if you want to store sweets for a long time, the Native Americans would turn it into sugar
Right.
or
Yep.
whatever
Yep.
because they could store it for a long time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And anyway, that was a major sweetening commodity in pioneer times.
Yeah, and I have heard that actually Thomas Jefferson was a big proponent of that. He promoted maple syrup.
Yep.
Because it was an American thing, and it made us less dependent on foreign sweeteners.
You betcha. You betcha. Well, anyway, I know one thing is I stock up every year with Battle Sugar Bush. I've been coming here for a long time. I've known your dad. He and I went to school together.
Yep,
so
that's what I understand.
And anyway, I just love this woods. I'll never forget when you folks. I remember he got a hold of me, and he was tubing the
Right.
trees.
Yep.
And he was telling me about the surge pump.
Yep.
It kind of reminded me when we had cows. It
Right.
kind of looked like almost the same
Well,
pump.
it's literally a vacuum pump from a dairy farm that he picked up from a farm that was upgrading their equipment, and it's still, all the use we need. We use it, about 3 to 6 weeks out of the year, and it provides all the vacuum that we need, and it still works really well.
Yeah. Now, my understanding, don't the trees themselves provide pressure for that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So some people wonder, are you sucking the sap out
That's
of the
the
tree?
idea people get.
Yeah, and it's not what happens. There's internal pressure in the tree that forces the sap out, and the vacuum, the pump that we have, it produces 15 inches of pressure, but it's just enough to kind of pull the sap along our tubing system into our pump house and into our storage tanks.
Yeah.
It's the internal pressure of the tree that forces that sap out.
Oh, yeah. Now, you still have to put buckets on some of your trees.
Yeah, the trees that sit in front of our shack, we've got a U-shaped driveway that goes around, and those. So I estimate somewhere between 85 and 90% of our trees are on our tubing system, where we don't go every day and collect that sap tree to tree. It's our tubing system, and somewhere between 10 and 15% of our trees we do it the old-fashioned way, just because it doesn't fit into our tubing system very well.
Right.
It's a new day.